So, Nolan Grayson was an alien Viltrumite born on the planet Viltrum. His father, Argyle, was the Viltrumites' leader. When he was very young, his father was killed by a Viltrumite traitor known as Phadus, who no longer believed in the Viltrumites' violent ways. Nolan was too young to remember anything about his father, and his true heritage was hidden from records in order to hide him from the Viltrumite enemies, as their enemies were trying to wipe out the entire bloodline of Argyle. After the death of Argyle, another Viltrumite took charge and became their leader. He was specially created to be the strongest Viltrumite, and his name was Thragg. The Viltrumites were then organized into the Viltrumite Empire, led by Thragg. In his youth, Omni-Man signed up to conquer planets for the Empire, and he was so successful that he went on to command his own unit. About 100 years ago, before the start of the main story, Nolan fought against an alien called Space Racer. The Space Racer was surprisingly strong, and he had a mysterious gun with him that was even able to kill Viltrumites. So, Nolan decided to trap him, and he ended up burying him alive on an asteroid from where he could never escape on his own. Later, Nolan also went to a very distant planet in space in order to conquer it for the Empire, but when he got there, he found that the planet is inhabited by a beastly species called Ragnars. Ragnars were extremely strong. Nolan realized the threat that Ragnars posed to the Viltrumite Empire if they were ever used against them, so he reported it to their base, and the Viltrumite Empire ended up blocking the sun of the Ragnars planet, which ended up freezing the entire planet along with all the Ragnars. Later, when the Viltrumite Empire was attacked by the Scourge virus, the virus killed 99.9% of the Viltrumites. As a result, the virus depleted the Viltrumite population down to less than 50. Because of their low numbers, the Viltrumite Empire decided to work with a different strategy for conquering planets. So, by taking advantage of their long lifespans, they decided they should infiltrate society first and weaken the chance of resisting its takeover. On Earth, Nolan met Cecil Stedman and wanted to learn human culture. Nolan then adopted the last name Grayson to appear more human. He met a woman named Debbie, his soon-to-be wife. Meanwhile, Cecil set Nolan up as Omni-Man, Earth's newest and most powerful superhero. After getting married, Debbie gave birth to Nolan's son, Mark Grayson. Over the years, Nolan continued his battles with supervillains, which led him to his original encounter with the Guardians of the Globe, the world's premier superhero team. Although he did not join them, he later worked with them. He also met Art Rosebaum, a costume maker for superheroes, who designed his Omni-Man costume. He told all of his human friends, including Art, Cecil, and even Debbie, a full story about why he was here on Earth. From time to time, he fought against the representative for the Coalition of Planets, Alan, and always bested him during his attempts to evaluate the planet's strength to defend itself. In the present era, the criminals known as the Mauler twins rise and attack the White House, but one complains that he should have checked his clones' calculations since they were supposed to be inside the building. Soon, the Guardians of the Globe arrive and beat the twins, while also rescuing the civilians with Omni-Man's help. Later, Nolan makes it home and kisses his wife, who tells him that they should get him out of that suit. Mark complains that his parents should not talk about sex in front of him, but his mother tells him that he should be happy to hear them express their love. They mention they would be going to Berlin, which makes Mark jealous. However, his father tells him that he could go himself once his powers kicked in. Later, when Nolan makes it home, he tells them he had been fighting a dragon in Hong Kong and gets ready to listen to Mark's day. Mark tells them that he has been getting his powers, but his father does not react until Debbie kicks him. Nolan congratulates him and tells him that they would train the next day. Once they are in the sky, Nolan tells him how to fly. But when he tells him to land, Mark had a hard time doing so and eventually crashes into the ground. Then Nolan told him to hit him and to use his whole body while doing it. Nolan showed Mark how to punch and hurt Mark, which Nolan told him was part of his preparation. At home, Debbie reads and sees Mark go to his room. She asks Nolan how bad the training had gone, and he says that he had pushed their son very hard since it was what he needed. She asks if maybe he had pushed him too hard, which makes Nolan very mad. Debbie asks him what had gotten into him, and he admits he did not know, but thinks that maybe their lives would have been better if Mark had not gotten his powers. Mark realized he needed something to punch in order to blow off steam and hears gunfire. 3 criminals run from the police after robbing a place. Mark fights a big criminal and manages to hurt him. Omni-Man approached him and told him he looked ridiculous, also mentioning that he had skipped a few steps since he had caused a lot of destruction. Mark asks his father to hit him, since he was not ready before, but his father tells him that he would not hit him. Mark grew desperate and told his father he knew that he did not believe in him, but he wanted to prove he was strong enough and wanted to be like him. Nolan hugs his son and tells him that he would be, then tells him to follow him. They fly to a tailor, where he tells Mark that he would take him shopping for a suit. Art Rosenbaum greets Mark and tells him it was a pleasure to meet him and gets Mark excited. Later, the Guardians of the Globe meet, but realize that none of them called one another. Red Rush sees Omni-Man fly towards the Immortal in order to punch him and manages to push him out of the way. The heroes are in shock and gasp, attacking him at the same time. As Red Rush attacked him, he managed to grab hold of him and squeezed his head while receiving punches from the speedster until he crushed his skull. Martian Man wraps himself around Omni-Man, and the Immortal asks him why he had killed Red Rush while preparing to punch him. Omni-Man receives punches, which make him stagger, and kills Darkwing while slamming him to the ground, followed by Green Ghost, who had caught Darkwing's body. Aquarius attacks Omni-Man, and the Immortal says that there must be somebody controlling him. However, they agree that they would kill him so that he did not kill them instead. Omni-Man managed to kill Aquarius, which angered Martian Man, who held on to Omni-Man so his colleagues could hit him. Omni-Man managed to get Martian Man off him and deeply injured the Immortal, subsequently killing War Woman. The Immortal asked him why he had done it, but Omni-Man did not answer and decapitated him. The Guardians are dead, and Omni-Man lays next to them, injured as well. A door opens and invisible agents look at the scene, followed by paramedics who are shocked and disgusted at the scene. They find Omni-Man is alive, and they move the bodies out from the room. Cecil Stedman mentions he had never seen anything like it and bangs his fist against the table. Omni-Man is brought to a hospital room where he is in a coma. When Nolan awoke, he told Mark that Debbie had told him that he was keeping the planet safe and wanted to hear everything. At training, Mark tried attacking his father, who at first was able to dodge his punch. However, when Mark landed one, he told him that he needed to be able to take one as well, and was about to punch him until Debbie interrupted. Cecil visited them and told them that they had seen somebody from Mars approaching Earth and needed to deal with him. Debbie refused, and Mark offered to do it. Nolan told him to knock some sense into the guy and send him back where he came from. Nolan tells Cecil what he remembers from the night the Guardians were killed. He tells him that he had gotten a distress call from the Guardians, but everything seemed fine when he had gotten there. However, the lights had gone out, and he fought against the enemy until he passed out. Cecil is not convinced, and says that he had never seen Nolan lose like that, but believed that somebody was acting clever. Soon, the Flaxan army invades the city, and Robot tells Teen Team that the Flaxans are now immune to the time stream, and that they should consider the city lost. He tells them that he will contact Cecil and request a nuclear response, but everybody disagrees. Invincible starts fighting the army, but is swiftly brought down and punched repeatedly in the face by the leader. Omni-Man arrives and starts defending the city, resisting all the attacks thrown at him and sending the enemies back where they had come from. However, when the leader looked up at Omni-Man once more, he punched him and went into the portal with him. Mark got worried and inadvertently revealed Omni-Man was his father to his teammates. When Mark got home, Debbie told Mark that his father Dimension hops a lot and Nolan would be home soon. Omni-Man told the Flaxans that they did not seem to understand that Earth was not theirs to conquer, taking them out and destroying their cities. Days later, Nolan arrived home and he had grown a full beard. He was hugged by Mark and Debbie, but they were repulsed by his smell and he told them he needed a shower. Just then, a news report came out revealing that the Guardians were confirmed dead. People gather at the Guardians of the Globe's funeral and Omni-Man prepares to give a speech. He mentions he has fought the unimaginable, but always knew he was not alone. Nolan tells the people gathered that the people who had died were his friends and mentors. He mentions that at least the fallen heroes would rest together, and Olga was upset that she could not see her late husband. When she threw herself at the ground, Debbie rushed to help her. When Eve asks him if he is alright, Mark mentions that he is unsure how to feel since it could have been his mother burying his father. Omni-Man spots Damien Darkblood, telling him that the ceremony is private. He complains that he never gets invited, but reminds him that he always showed up anyway, adding that he wanted to discover clues and catch the killer, but Omni-Man told him not to pretend to do it, because he cared, knowing he only did not want to go home, and told him that he had already told Cecil everything he knew. Darkblood repeats that he knew Omni-Man had seen and heard nothing, having been left for dead. Omni-Man asked if he was insinuating something, but Darkblood said that he simply did not understand how to communicate like humans. The Graysons make it back to their house. Nolan asks them if they want pizza, saying he could go to Naples and back before it gets cold, but Debbie asks him to let the delivery man take care of it. As Nolan tried watching television, all he saw was the speech he gave at the funeral while he changed the channels. A few days later, as Debbie cooked dinner, Nolan threw a piece of the monster, asking if she wanted calamari. She tells him to get it off the counter while laughing, and asks if he had called Cecil about putting some protection on the house, but he tells her he had been busy but would do it later. Omni-Man points out to Invincible that he is messing up the desert since he was flying too low. When the latter turns around, he finds that he has created a big cloud of sand. Omni-Man tells him to build up speed and endurance by pushing himself, telling Invincible that being a Viltrumite was not easy. Omni-Man did a spin, and Invincible tried to follow, but lost control, so his father proposed going to Mount Everest, with the last one to reach it washing dishes for a week. Omni-Man reached Mount Everest first, and told his son to take deep breaths since the air was thin. Omni-Man tells Invincible that sometimes he forgets how beautiful this planet can be, and tells him that Viltrum was very different. Invincible told him that he could not believe he had left everything behind to go to a planet he had never even seen before, and his father told him that when his grandparents died, he had felt lost for a long time and saw going to Earth as a chance to build something new. He told him that Debbie changed the Earth from a job into a home, but Invincible told him that he did not know if he could leave everything behind, and Omni-Man replied, saying that being like them took sacrifice. Darkblood pours himself a drink and receives Nolan, telling him that he had wondered if he would come. Nolan tells him that he had been in his house and frightened his wife. Darkblood mentions that he had murdered 7 people, but Nolan tells him that perhaps it had been him, going to his house in order to finish the job he started, being a demon. Darkblood tells him that demons know evil when they see it, but Nolan ignores and tells him that if he goes back in his house, he would not have to do anything, since people would believe him over the demon. Darkblood tells him that he would not give up, since the truth could not be hidden and his wife already suspected, wondering how long until his son did as well. Nolan and Debbie walk through Rome to a fancy restaurant, which Nolan had made reservations to, which Debbie mentions is new. Later, Invincible and Omni-Man fought a villain who they wanted to talk. Omni-Man taught him how to scare villains and dropped him, catching him later. Then, Mark attempts to stop an asteroid heading for Earth and manages to do so successfully, throwing it back into space. After a huge effort, Omni-Man tells him that the asteroid was small, which shocked his son. At dinner, Mark tells his parents that he can help Titan take down Machine Head, but Debbie was not listening. After Mark's explanation, Nolan tells him that he would be making a huge mistake because he was being used, and that problem was beneath him. Debbie tells Mark that sometimes people are not who they appear to be, and adds that helping someone was never beneath him. Debbie asks Nolan why he would tell Mark that saving lives was beneath him, to which he responds that Mark did things on a bigger scale and she did not understand that. She reminds him that when he had first arrived at Earth, he knew nothing about humans, and she had taught him how to be a superhero for Earth. Later, Debbie calls Nolan, asking him to get food from Rome and wine from Provence. When Nolan leaves, she checks the house and finds the air vent has been moved. She also finds a bag, but hides it as Nolan comes back. Later, Nolan asks Cecil if Darkblood had cracked yet, but Cecil tells him that Darkblood is stubborn. When asked if Darkblood had murdered the Guardians, Cecil says that they do not know, but he wonders why he would even do it in the first place. Omni-Man tells him that Darkblood is a demon. Cecil asks if Mark had not told him that he would be taking on Machine Head by himself, and is surprised to see Mark does not listen to Nolan, which is normal for teenagers from Earth. Nolan asks Debbie if she would be going out, and she tells him that she needs to pick up some clothes and something for dinner. Nolan offers to come along, but she tells him that he needs to work on his book and leaves. When she is gone, Nolan opens up his bag and finds his suit was gone. Later, since he found out Debbie had been seeing Art, he angrily approaches him from behind, but shows him a few beers he had bought. Nolan and Art share laughs while reminiscing about the past. However, he asks Art why he is a little nervous. Art tells him he is tired, and Nolan says he understands since he knows how things could change from one day to another, and hands Art another beer. Nolan makes it home, where Debbie drinks wine. She asks him why he had killed the Guardians, but he denies it. She throws her bottle of wine at him when he tells her she is drunk, but he catches, and she angrily tells him to fuck himself before going upstairs. He breaks the bottle of wine and punches a hole through the wall. Omni-Man practices how to tell Mark he had killed the Guardians, saying it was his responsibility, confident Mark would understand. He says he would say something that would change everything. Nolan looks for Mark in his house, but finds nobody except a GDA agent, who he grabs and slams into the ground. He is shot at by many of the agents, who he kills swiftly. He finds the house the GDA had bought in front of them, which infuriates him, but Donald tells him it was for his family's protection. Nolan tells him he has always been pathetic and crushes his spine. Donald tells Cecil that it had been an honor to work with him and blows the house up. William drives home when he is approached by an angered Omni-Man. William asks if he was okay, but Nolan simply asks where Mark was since William was supposed to drop him off an hour ago. He tells Nolan that Mark had gone with Eve. Nolan puts a dent in William's car, which scares him, and asks where Eve is. Nolan flies, but is struck down by an enormous beam of light coming from a satellite in space, which manages to bring him down and many animals around him. However, he soon gets up once again, resisting the beam's energy and destroying the satellite. Cecil comments that $400 billion had just been used on a nosebleed. Then, Nolan is attacked by Sinclair's cyborgs, which put up a fight with him as he tries to get them off. Nolan faces another monster on his way to Mark, which he tells Cecil he has defeated already. However, Cecil told him the monster now felt no pain and was now juiced up with every drug, enhancement and upgrade available. As Nolan was about to be eaten, Mark punches the creature and sends it flying. Nolan awoke, and Mark happily told him it was about time they teamed up together. When the creature rose, Cecil tells Eve not to help them and get to Guardians HQ. Cecil is told that a new object was approaching Omni-Man's location, turning out to be the Immortal, who immediately starts hitting him furiously. Nolan caught one of his punches and stabbed his fist into his stomach, punching all the way through him and shocking the entire world, who was watching thanks to the news helicopters. However, Immortal grabs his thumbs and sticks them into Omni-Man's eyes, so he grabs his hand and splits his body in half. Nolan then approaches Mark and explains that he is from Viltrum, which was perfect, but had taken them a lot of strength, determination, and courage to get there. In order to reach their full potential, they removed the weak from their society until they were unstoppable. When Nolan was born, Viltrum was already the greatest empire in the galaxy, and its people decided to make it the only empire in the entire universe. When Nolan was old enough, he joined the war effort until the forces were stretched thin and the expansion stopped. Then each officer was given a planet to weaken by themselves. Nolan went to Earth, and it was now time for Mark and himself to get Earth ready to join the Viltrumite Empire. Mark cries, but Nolan reassures him that this is for the greater good. Nolan simply asks him if he has any idea how long they lived, since the older they got, the slower they aged. He tells Mark that he would live for thousands of years since Viltrumite DNA was so pure, he was nearly pure Viltrumite. He adds that everybody he loves and knows would be gone before he even looked 30, so he tells Mark that Earth was not his world, but he could help out by ending hunger, stopping wars, and giving them medical technology. When Mark asks, he lets Mark know that he does love his mother, but she was more like a pet to him, which angers Mark, asking Nolan if he really believes he would enslave his friends to aliens he had never met, adding he did not give a shit about Viltrum. He tells Nolan that he would not let him destroy his home, and Nolan tells him that he did not know what he was saying and would not let him interfere. Nolan understands and punches Mark into the ground and asks him if he really believed he could stop him. Mark punches him, but Nolan catches it and does not move, crushing his hand and throwing him away. Mark tells his father not to hit him anymore since it was not too late, but Nolan tells him it was, as jets reach their location. Nolan tells Mark to look at all humans needed in order to imitate their power, saying that it was right to pity them, wrong to value them over Viltrumites. Nolan then punches him away all the way over to a big city, where he causes a lot of destruction with the fall. He punches Mark underground to a train station and holds him in front of one of the moving trains. Nolan takes Mark deep underwater, where he stops moving and then throws him into a mountain. He punches Mark once more with a punch so strong it cracks the mountain, causing an avalanche that covers Mark and a town down below. He picks Mark up and asks him if he has had enough, but Mark once again tells him he would stop him, so Nolan tells him he was ready for that to happen whenever Mark was. Nolan tells him that his intentions were wasted since making Earth a part of the Empire would make Earth better than it ever was. Mark asks what would happen if they resisted and is told that they were there to keep them from resisting. Nolan asks if he really wants to die for the planet and accepts that he could always start again with another kid. He punches Mark repeatedly until he loses consciousness. Nolan could not punch Mark anymore and lays down next to him as his son gasps weakly. He asks Mark why he had made him do what he had done, since he was only fighting so he would watch everybody around him die. He asks Mark what he would have after 500 years, and Mark tells him he would still have him. Silenced by the admission, Nolan looks at his hands, thinking about what he's done and wondering if it really was the right thing to do. He realizes he still loves Mark as well as Earth and flies away, crying as he breaks through the atmosphere and makes his way out of the solar system. After leaving Earth, Nolan voyaged towards countless stars and planets. For months, he continued to drift aimlessly until he found a black hole. He stared at the dark mass sucking in matter before him, his eyes empty and lost. He began to allow the black hole's gravity to draw him in, ready to end his own life. However, this suicide attempt was stopped when he saw a spacecraft full of passengers caught into the black hole's gravity and plunging towards the event horizon. Omni-Man decides to save them, and he saves and takes the passengers back to their world. There, he quickly was given amnesty and became their emperor. He also became close with one of the passengers, and the two became married, and eventually another child was born. For a number of months, he lived on Thraxa with a new outfit and a new persona called the Monarch, portrayed as a messiah-like king to the Thraxans. He later sends a Flaxan to get Mark to come to Thraxa. The Thraxan's mission was successful, and Omni-Man meets Mark again. Mark clenches his fist, as does Omni-Man, who is also prepared to attack him. But then suddenly Mark starts crying, and Nolan embraces him. Mark asks him to come back to Earth, but Nolan refuses. Nolan states that what he's done can't be undone, and he must stay on Thraxa. Nolan explains to Mark how he got to Thraxa and leads Mark to his private chambers. Nolan reveals to Mark that he has a new mate, Andressa, and he has a child with her. Nolan goes on to explain that his son's purple skin will have him killed because the Viltrumites consider a genetic flaw a weakness, and his time on Earth has changed him. He also asks for Mark's help in defending Thraxa from the Viltrumites. Soon the Viltrumites arrive, and Nolan asks that Mark take Andressa and his son to safety. Nolan fights and disembowels Lucan, believing he had killed him. He rushes back to take Andressa and his son back to safety. He arrives to see the two other Viltrumites who came to slaughter the Thraxans. Nolan becomes enraged and takes it out on his son until he sees the Viltrumites and attacks them. He saves Mark from being attacked by one of them. Nolan and Mark would injure the duo with Nolan nearly killing the two, but he is ambushed by Lucan, who reveals himself to be alive after his disembowelment. He breaks Nolan's spine and passes out. Nolan is then taken prisoner, but asks Mark to read his books before he's taken off. After he was taken away, and while his back injury was healing, he shares a cell with a prisoner of an unknown alien race. He notices something wrong with Nolan, and Nolan reveals to him that he misses his wife. He attempts to escape, but his plans are stopped by Craig. Craig informs that Nolan is in full health now, so he will now be put to death. Craig inflicts damage on Nolan and has 2 other Viltrumites take him back to his cell. On his way back, he notices Alan and wonders why he is here. Alan communicates with him telepathically and assures him that he talk with Nolan again. Alan later speaks with Nolan about the coalition of planets, Mark's role in the war between the 2 factions, and Alan's plan to free Nolan. Nolan is reluctant at first until Alan tells him of Telia and how the Unipans won't allow their union. Nolan tells Alan of his wife and how his love for her is against Viltrumite customs. He befriends Alan and Nolan decides to go with Alan's plan. When a Viltrumite arrives to kill him, Nolan informs Alan. While the Viltrumites attempted to kill Nolan, Alan breaks out from his prison cell, frees other prisoners, and arrives to his aid with Battle Beast. While the battle ensues, Alan punches a hole into the prison while taking advantage of his ability to breathe in the vacuum of space. Alan is attacked by a Viltrumite, but Nolan intervenes. The duo readies a punch and kills the Viltrumite, gushing his brain matter in space. Alan becomes worried because he believes they will send more Viltrumites, but Nolan reveals that there are less than 50 pure-blooded Viltrumites in the universe and that there won't be any arriving to the scene. So Nolan reveals to Alan the origin of the Viltrumite Empire and how they became an unbeatable race. Nolan also reveals that the Viltrumite Empire will likely turn Earth into a breeding camp. Then Alan grabs his gear and the duo head to Thalaskria. He goes to Alan's apartment and interrupts Alan and Telia's moment. She fires at Nolan with a weapon, though not having an effect on him. The next day they go to see Phaedus, and Nolan reveals to Phaedus information about the Viltrumites. Phaedus also reveals that he is a Viltrumite and that he didn't realize he was the only Viltrumite to rebel. Phaedus asks that the duo go on a mission for them, revealing that the Viltrumites have a spy in the coalition. Phaedus states that the duo only reports to him and sends them on their way. Nolan and Alan head to an asteroid belt looking for a gun belonging to a being Space Racer. Nolan states that he battled him hundreds of years ago and he believed Space Racer died. They find the gun, and as soon as they attempt to grab it, the gun flies away to the asteroid where Space Racer was trapped, so Space Racer turns out be alive. And it shocks Omni-Man as well as Alan, because they never expected that someone can survive trapped in an asteroid for 100 years without any food. So Nolan and Alan hold him down until Space Racer shoots his gun, causing a chain reaction. But after a brief scuffle, Nolan and Alan convince Space Racer that he has changed. Phaedus congratulates the duo on their mission because Space Racer is a very strong ally. Phaedus sends Omni-Man and Alan on various missions such as retrieving the Ragnars and listing the aid of other allies. Some missions they were successful with, while others didn't go well, and after all the missions, Nolan and Phaedus discussed Nolan's worries about the war. Phaedus reveals to Nolan that he created the Scourge virus. Phaedus also reveals that he created a stronger version of it and he won't hesitate to use it again if they are close to losing the war. Phaedus then sent Nolan and Alan to Earth to get any allies who could fight in the Viltrumite war. Omni-Man and Alan met Mark and he asked that Mark join him in the war against the Viltrumites. Next, Alan and Nolan would go see Tech Jacket at his space station. They recruit him and Nolan heads to see his wife. Nolan apologizes for what he said with Debbie not wanting to hear it. He leaves to Oliver's room and asks that he come to Thalaskria with them. Oliver accepts and they leave on a Thalaskrian spaceship until they are ambushed by Conquest, Lucan and an unnamed Viltrumite. Conquest grabs Nolan. He's overjoyed that he gets to kill Nolan and headbutts him. While Oliver is battling Lucan, Nolan intervenes and chokes Lucan. The Viltrumites then unleash a conquered race of alien and Oliver runs out of breath, so he goes to a habitable planet. Nolan rushes to see where Mark and Conquest are. He arrives with Oliver to see Conquest dead and Mark disemboweled, nearly dying from the battle. Nolan tends to Mark's wounds and buries Conquest. Over the time of Mark healing, Nolan uses the time to know Oliver better on a personal level. Months later, Mark fully heals from his injuries, and Nolan reveals to Mark that Mark killed Conquest. The trio heads back into the fight and heads to Taliskria to assist in the war effort. Soon after Omni-Man and his sons returned, Phaedus prepared the coalition and its allies for the final battle at Viltrum. Then Phaedus leads the group to planet Viltrum, but Phaedus is ambushed by a Viltrumite woman. Battleby smacks her with his mace, and soon Thragg also attacks with some Viltrumites. Space Racer arrives with the Ragnars, and they commence battle. Anissa grabs Nolan and attempts to suffocate him. He attacks her, and Phaedus grabs Mark to go with his plan. Nolan follows and grabs Mark, noticing that Mark isn't going as fast as Phaedus and him. They charge into Viltrum and successfully destroy the planet's core. After the planet explodes, Nolan is subdued by Viltrumites, but is released after a shockwave. He sides himself with Phaedus, but soon Thragg attacks them. Thragg was in extreme rage, and he grabs and rips out the head of Phaedus. Looking in shock, Nolan readies himself with Alan to fight the remaining Viltrumites and Thragg. So Thragg attacks as Mark and almost killed him, but Nolan intervenes to save his son. Thragg reveals to Nolan that Phaedus killed Argul, Emperor of Viltrum, and sent the Empire into disarray. Nolan reveals that he doesn't care and that the Viltrumites deserve extinction for their galactic tyranny. Thragg headbutts Nolan until Battle Beast intervenes, but Thragg throws Battle Beast aside and continues his assault on Nolan and Mark. He then releases Nolan and attacks Mark. Nolan rushes to Mark's aid, only to be impaled and disemboweled by Thragg. Both Omni-Man and Invincible are on death's door, and they are left floating in the space. Thragg decides to let the duo live, and they retreat from Viltrum. 2 weeks later, Omni-Man recovers from his injuries and sees Oliver in a stasis tank. Alan reveals to him that there is no Viltrumite activity in the galaxy. Mark believes that the Viltrumites wouldn't have let Nolan and him live unless they wanted to hurt them. Mark believes they went to Earth. So, Tech Jacket, Nolan, and Mark head to Earth. Mark heads out of the spaceship with Nolan following him. Thragg reveals himself to the duo. Mark attempts to fight, but Thragg suggests they talk. Thragg offers a truce in exchange for the Viltrumites to take over Earth. Mark refuses, but Thragg explains that they will hide among Earth's inhabitants and interbreed with them before announcing their takeover. Mark reluctantly agrees, thinking back on what could happen if he didn't. After confirming their agreement, Thragg flies off while thanking them and ending the Viltrumite war. Mark leaves to go see Eve and Nolan and Debbie talk. A heartbroken Debbie begins crying after remembering old feelings. Nolan goes to her, and she talks about how she wishes things to be the way they used to be. Nolan says that they will never be, because he won't hide secrets from her again. Omni-Man then visits the Pentagon and realizes that he must leave Earth again, so he reveals to Mark and Eve that him and Debbie will be going to Taliskria to work on their relationship. In Taliskria, he notices Oliver crime fighting, and they head to Debbie. Alan asks to see Nolan, as Alan is concerned with pressure from the Coalition to kill the Viltrumites off. He sends Nolan onto his new place with Debbie and Oliver. The next morning, Alan calls Nolan and Oliver and asks Oliver to leave. Alan reveals that he's gonna handle the Viltrumites on Earth by dispensing the Scourge virus into the atmosphere. Nolan becomes angry after hearing what Alan plans to do, and as a result, the two battle. Nolan condemns Alan for suggesting such a plan, since it's similar to what the Viltrumites did to Alan's home planet. Alan rebuffs by saying that it'll stop that incident from happening again. Nolan launches Alan into space, and Alan injures Nolan until Oliver arrives. Oliver lands a low blow on Alan until the Coalition military arrives. Alan explains what he plans to do with the virus, and Oliver sides with him, much to Nolan's shock. Nolan explains that the Viltrumite will change while on Earth because Earth will change the Viltrumite way of thinking as it did to him. Oliver disagrees as he states that humans are selfish and are just as violent as Viltrumites. Nolan rushes to Oliver, but he can't hurt his own son. Alan punches Nolan into his apartment house, and Debbie condemns him, mistaking him for trying to take over. The Coalition military arrives and they arrest Nolan, but Nolan is soon released after Alan realizes the error of his ways. Alan then sends Nolan back to Earth to check on the Viltrumite situation. When Nolan and Debbie arrive to Earth, they find out that Mark is dead, which was a big shock for them. But Mark appears, after some time, stating that it was a clone that was killed by Dinosaurus to fool everyone into believing that Invincible died. After some time, Cecil asks to talk with Omni-Man. Cecil believes that Nolan must still be punished for his first battle with his son, so Cecil gives Nolan Exile and states that he will have to stay on the Guardian's moon base. He also asks that he keep an eye on the Viltrumite warship. After Cecil left the moon base, Nolan and Debbie prepare to have an intimate moment. However, Thragg ambushes with the intent to kill Nolan. Seeing his wife almost being launched into space, he headbutts Thragg and rushes to save his wife. He manages to get her into an emergency airlock and continues his battle with Thragg, while being confused about why he broke their truce. Nolan continues to say that he poses no threat to Thragg, and Thragg decides to let Nolan know his origin before he kills him. Thragg reveals that Nolan is the son of Lord Argyle, who is the former emperor of the Viltrumite Empire. Thragg also reveals that he won't let Nolan rule because he is a traitor. Nolan argues that he doesn't desire to rule, but Thragg decides that Nolan must die. Thragg severely injures Nolan until Craig stops him, who is accompanied by Fula, Lucan, and Anissa. Nolan lands a blow on Thragg, and the four ask why Thragg is attempting to kill Nolan. They also discover Nolan's heritage and turn on Thragg. Together they beat the crap out of Thragg for keeping this a secret and for trying to kill their emperor's son. They attempt to kill him, but Nolan asks that they let him live. The four obey and they bow to him, symbolizing his new role as emperor. Nolan gives a brief speech during his inauguration, citing that the Viltrumites should welcome the change from their time on Earth. He leaves to heal and visits Thragg in his holding cell. Thragg suggests that Nolan kill him, but Nolan refuses, arguing that those are the old ways of the Viltrumites. After fully healing from his injuries, Nolan brings Thragg before the other Viltrumite to serve out his sentence, but instead of killing him, Nolan decides that Thragg is to be exiled. So Thragg leaves the Viltrumite warship and Nolan relays the message to Alan, much to Alan's frustration. Nolan also sees Mark and they head to the moon. Mark reveals to Nolan that Eve is pregnant with his child and Nolan congratulates him, and Mark heads back home after they discuss other topics. Afterward, Nolan and Debbie would have Mark and Eve over for dinner. Eve accidentally reveals that she is pregnant to Debbie after Nolan asks Mark to tell Debbie. To see how strong they are, the Omni-Man and Invincible engage in an arm wrestling match. They are at a standstill until Nolan gains the upper hand after Mark is distracted. The result destroys the tables, much to Debbie's anger. Later, Nolan goes to meet Mark after Eve's leg was dismembered. Nolan reveals to Mark that Monster Girl was found in space and she is in surgery. Anissa reports to Nolan that they know where Robot's location is. Another Viltrumite reports that one of his drones is on the moon. The Viltrumites head to the moon, and Robot reveals that he knows that Monster Girl is in their custody. Robot asks how she is doing, and Nolan reveals she's stable. Robot reveals that he knows about the Viltrumite mission to interbreed and asks that Omni-Man work with him. The duo come to terms on their truce and prepare to take their leave. Omni-Man stops Mark when he attempts to destroy Robot's drone. He tells Mark that he has allied with Robot, much to Mark's disgust. Mark attempts to convince his father to help him take down Robot, but Nolan refuses. Nolan explains that doing nothing is the best because doing something will put too many lives at risk. Then Anissa interrupts and Mark grabs her by her neck. Nolan calls for Mark, but he demands that Nolan stays out of it. Mark lets her go after something he said, and Nolan is left wondering what's going on. Mark refuses to speak, and he leaves the warship. After learning Mark is leaving Earth, Nolan has a meal with Mark and Art. Nolan says his goodbyes to Mark before he and Eve take their child to Thalaskria. After this, Invincible was teleported to a different timeline by a mysterious creature, where he lived for some time, and there we got to see the old version of Omni-Man who came to conquer Earth. Then Mark soon returned to his original timeline, but in his own world, 5 years had passed, and no one knew what happened to Mark or where he was for 5 years. So 5 years later, at the same time of his Invincible's return, Nolan teams up with the immortal Tech Jacket, Robot, Fula, and the other Viltrumites to stop the technicians. During that time, Nolan and Robot became friendly with one another. Later, he returns to his home on the moon and reunites with Mark, who has returned after 5 years. Nolan also says hi to Eve and Terra before having a private chat with Mark about him and Robot being friends now. Suddenly, Anissa breaks in to try to talk to Mark but gets attacked by Eve. Nolan starts to help Anissa up until Eve almost shouts out what Anissa did to Mark. Nolan gets confused, starts to strangle Anissa until Mark says that nothing is her fault. Anissa starts to explain why she came, but Nolan tells her to leave. Later, Nolan takes Mark to see Robot on Earth, who tries to convince Mark of all the good he has accomplished in the last 5 years. Mark talks to Nolan privately in space, saying that he will never trust Rex, despite Nolan's attempts to persuade him. Mark, Eve, and Terra then leave for their home after saying goodbye to Nolan and Debbie. Later, when Oliver was killed by Thragg, Omni-Man goes to his funeral. There, Invincible starts beating Alan because it was his mistake that got Oliver killed. As they kept fighting, Omni-Man asked his wife if he should interfere in their fight, but his wife stops him from doing anything, and she tells him to take care of their grandkids and be a good grandfather. Later, Alan asks Invincible's help to finally kill Thragg, because Thragg has built a big army that they alone can't fight. Invincible goes to ask Omni-Man for help, because Omni-Man is the new Viltrumite Emperor and he can command other Viltrumites under him. But Omni-Man refuses and states that he can't put the lives of his people in danger, and he himself was the person who let Thragg live in the first place, so it's all his mistake. But in the end, Omni-Man agrees to help in order to finally put an end to Thragg. Omni-Man and his team then start attacking worlds that are under the control of Thragg, and soon they also reach the planet where Thragg currently lives. As soon as they reach the planet, Thragg attacks them with all of his forces, and his army turns out to be much larger than they expected. He literally had thousands of hybrid Viltrumites children that he produced in just 5 years, and all of his children were constantly attacking Omni-Man and his team. Their numbers were in the thousands, and they destroyed Omni-Man's alien army, but they were not as strong as Omni-Man or as Invincible, and their bodies were breaking apart as they were hitting Omni-Man. Alan and Invincible were also easily able to kill dozens of them, but their sheer number was overwhelming, and most of them were just basically doing suicide attacks. Omni-Man and Alan tells the army to retreat, but Thragg follows them, which leads Thragg and his army to Earth. When Omni-Man notices this, he contacts all the Viltrumites living on Earth and commands them to be prepared for a battle against Thragg's army, and all of them instantly follow his orders. Before their final battle, Invincible and Omni-Man talk, and Invincible reveals to Omni-Man that Anissa raped him in the past and how deeply it affected him. But Omni-Man assures him that Anissa has completely changed now and she is a completely new person. Soon Thragg's forces attack, and Omni-Man also attacks with his Viltrumite warriors and the military of Coalition of Planets. Omni-Man goes straight to attack Thragg, and an insane battle starts in space. Omni-Man's and his allies are strong compared to Thragg's hybrid Viltrumite army, but their sheer number is proven too overwhelming for them. Thragg says, "You should have killed me when you had a chance," and he then breaks Omni-Man's hand with a headbutt. He grabs Omni-Man and was about to finish him, but then suddenly, Invincible comes to save his father and attacks Thragg. But Thragg's children attacks Invincible, and Thragg returns to finish Omni-Man. Omni-Man breaks Thragg's nose, and Thragg compliments him by saying that Omni-Man is the only one capable enough to lead Viltrumites after him, but now he is going to take back his place as their ruler. So Thragg then stabs Omni-Man's heart with his arm, and by using his insane strength, he destroys Omni-Man's entire torso. Looking at Omni-Man's horrifying condition makes Alan, Invincible, and everyone else cry, and Invincible gets extremely angry and starts killing all of Thragg's children, and then he directly attacks Thragg. Eve comes out of the spaceship and rescues Omni-Man, who is still breathing. The doctors confirm that Omni-Man is still alive, and they start treating him. Sometime after, when Invincible manages to defeat Thragg, he goes to see Omni-Man, who is in a very critical situation. Invincible says that his father will survive, but Omni-Man says that Thragg actually damaged his heart, and because of his damaged heart, his body is not healing properly, so he won't be able to survive for much longer. Omni-Man has a final conversation with Invincible as father and son, and in the end, he tells Invincible that he has to lead the other Viltrumites and now he is their emperor. And with this, Omni-Man dies. So if you guys want me to make some more Invincible related videos, you can comment your thoughts in the comments and I'll make sure to have a look at them.